In a small southern town, a skilled black hair stylist worked tirelessly, but earned only meager wages, just enough to cover her daily expenses. One day, after giving a free haircut to a rough-looking veteran, she lost her job. When her ruthless boss humiliated her, cut her pay, and threw her out, she left with nothing but her dignity. She thought she had lost everything, feeling trapped and hopeless. What she didn't know was that her act of kindness had gained overwhelming support and spread quickly, bringing her an unexpected opportunity she had never seen before. Rivertown was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. A quiet southern town where the pace of life was slow and traditions held firm. Tucked between rows of century-old buildings was Pearl's hair studio, the biggest and most well-known salon in town. It was where the wealthier folks came for their weekly touch-ups, where gossip flowed as freely as the hairspray. And it was where Jamal Brooks, a 32-year-old black hairstylist, the hands of an artist, had worked tirelessly for years, waiting for the day she could finally break free. Jamal hadn't always planned on staying in Rivertown. She had dreams, big ones. She wanted a salon of her own, a place where people, no matter who they were, could walk in and feel respected. But dreams didn't pay the bills, and leaving wasn't so simple. She had signed a restrictive contract with Pearl Anderson, the salon's owner, a woman whose reputation for cruelty nearly outweighed her reputation for styling. Pearl had given Jamal a job when she was just starting out, fresh out of beauty school, eager and naive. But it didn't take long for Jamal to realize that Pearl didn't see her as an asset, just another pair of hands to exploit. Pearl made it clear, without ever saying it outright, that she didn't think a black woman like Jamal had any real future in this industry, not beyond taking appointments, sweeping floors, and staying in her place. Jamal had built a loyal clientele, customers who came to the salon because of her skills, not because of Pearl's name on the sign. Yet, despite bringing in more business than anyone else, she was paid less and given the worst shifts. She had tried, once, to secure a loan to open her own place, but banks weren't so keen on funding a black stylist in a town where the old guard still ran things. So she stayed. She swallowed her pride, pocketed the bitterness, and kept moving forward, one cut at a time. That morning, as Jamal walked down Main Street toward work, she stopped at a small coffee stand, needing caffeine before another long day. That's when she saw him, Ray Thompson. Ray had been a name that once carried weight in Rivertown. A former Army sergeant, he had returned from his service overseas to a town that called him a hero, but treated him like a ghost. At 65, he had the worn-out look of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and expected even less. His beard was overgrown, his clothes slightly disheveled, but his presence commanded attention. What people in town didn't realize was that Ray was no ordinary man down on his luck. He was an observer, a writer, a man who disguised himself in life's rough edges to understand it better. Jamal had met him before, years ago, when he had first come back. They weren't exactly friends, but there was an unspoken understanding between them, two people who knew what it was like to feel like outsiders in a place that never truly accepted them. "Morning, Ray," Jamal greeted, offering a warm but tired smile. Ray nodded, adjusting the old military cap he always wore. "Mornin', Jamal. You look like you could use some coffee." She motioned to the stand. Ray hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." "Oh, please. I insist," she said, waving him off before ordering a second cup. When the barista handed it over, Ray took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. "Haven't had a good cup of coffee in a while," he admitted. Jamal leaned against the counter, eyeing him. "You ever gonna let me clean that mess up?" she teased, pointing to his wild, untamed beard and hair. Ray chuckled, but there was something distant in his expression. "Ain't much point in it." Jamal frowned. "Come by the shop later. Let me fix you up." He looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to read what was behind the offer. He knew Pearl, knew what kind of person she was. He also knew that Jamal wasn't the type to let something as petty as a racist, bitter old woman stop her from doing what was right. "You sure that won't get you into trouble?" he asked carefully. Jamal hesitated. The truth was, she knew exactly what would happen if Pearl found out. She had spent years playing by Pearl's rules, keeping her head down, trying not to give the woman any more reason to see her as disposable. Offering Ray a free cut, especially when Pearl already had a habit of turning her nose up at men like him, was a direct challenge to everything Pearl believed in. And yet, looking at Ray, this man who had served his country, who had sacrificed more than most of the people who judged him ever would, Jamal knew there wasn't a choice to make. "If Pearl has a problem with it, she can take it out of my paycheck," Jamal finally said, firm but calm. Ray exhaled, shaking his head with something close to amusement. "All right then. I'll see you later." Jamal watched as he walked away, knowing full well that she had just made a decision that would change everything. The morning at Pearl's hair studio started like any other. Jamal arrived early, unlocking the glass door to the shop, inhaling the familiar scent of hairspray and freshly brewed coffee from the small station in the corner. The place was already humming with quiet conversations as clients settled into their chairs, flipping through magazines, exchanging pleasantries. The usual rhythm of the salon gave her a sense of routine, of normalcy, even as a dull unease sat heavy in her chest. She hadn't told anyone about inviting Ray. Not because she was ashamed, but because she knew how things worked here. The moment Pearl caught wind of it, there'd be hell to pay. It wasn't just about the money. Pearl's issues ran deeper than profit. She had a specific clientele, a certain image she wanted her business to project. And in her mind, people like Ray, people who didn't fit her neat, polished world, weren't part of it. Jamal worked through the morning, keeping her head down, letting muscle memory take over as she snipped, trimmed, and styled. But every so often, her eyes flickered toward the door, waiting. And then, just past noon, he walked in. Ray stood in the doorway, surveying the space like a man who knew he didn't belong but had decided to enter anyway. The shop grew noticeably quieter. A few women in expensive blouses glanced up from their magazines, exchanging looks, subtle but unmistakable. Jamal felt it like a shift in the air, the way people stiffened, the way their polite smiles faltered just slightly before returning to their conversations. Ray ignored them. He gave Jamal a nod, slow and deliberate, and made his way to her chair. She kept her voice light. "You ready to let me work my magic?" He chuckled as he sat down, shaking his head. "Ain't much magic needed for this old head, but do what you gotta do." Jamal draped the cape around his shoulders, fastening it at the neck before running her fingers through the mess of silver-streaked hair. "You ever had a proper fade?" "Can't say I have." "Well, today's your lucky day." She got to work, the low buzz of clippers filling the space, drowning out the quiet murmurs from the other stylists and customers. As she worked, she found herself talking about growing up in Rivertown, about how she'd spent years trying to prove herself in a town that never truly let her belong. Ray listened, nodding now and then, before finally saying, "You know, I spent years thinking a uniform would make me matter. That if I gave enough of myself, this country would always have a place for me." Jamal paused mid-trim, watching him through the mirror. He gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Turns out the second you stop wearing it, the second you stop being useful, people forget. They don't see the man anymore. Just the things they assume about him." She swallowed, gripping the clippers a little tighter. "They don't get to decide who you are." Ray met her gaze in the mirror. "Neither do they for you." Jamal took a breath and kept going, letting the work ground her, letting the weight of his words settle somewhere deep inside her. By the time she was finished, Ray looked like a different man. The rough, unkempt edges were gone, replaced by sharp, clean lines that softened the years in his face. He ran a hand over his freshly shaved jaw, exhaling slowly. "Damn," he muttered. "Almost forgot what I looked like." Jamal grinned. "Told you it was magic." And for a brief moment, she forgot about Pearl, forgot about the tension simmering in the shop. All she saw was Ray, a man who had been through hell and back, finally looking like himself again. And then the door swung open, and Pearl walked in. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, scanning the scene, taking in Ray in her chair, the way Jamal was brushing the last of the loose hairs from his shoulders. She set her bag down, her mouth pressing into a thin, unimpressed line. The room tensed. Even the stylists working on their clients seemed to hesitate, as if waiting for the inevitable. Pearl didn't address Ray. Didn't even look at him. Instead, she turned her eyes on Jamal and asked, voice deceptively even, did he pay? Jamal felt it then, the inevitable crack, the moment where everything changed. She knew, in that instant, that there was no version of this conversation that ended well, but she refused to look away. I told him it was on me, she said, her tone measured, calm. Pearl's expression barely shifted, but her voice carried a sharpness that could cut skin. You told him. A pause. So, we're just handing out charity now. Jamal clenched her jaw, but before she could speak, Ray did. Didn't realize a haircut could be charity, he said, his voice level but firm. Guess I missed the sign out front saying this place don't serve people like me. Pearl's eyes snapped to him then, like she was only just acknowledging his presence. We serve paying customers. Ray's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That right? He looked around the shop. Funny. I don't remember getting turned away when I used to come here wearing a uniform. Pearl flushed, just barely. Jamal couldn't stay silent any longer. I said I'd cover it. Take it out of my paycheck if you have to. Pearl laughed, then short, bitter. Oh, don't worry, I will. And while I'm at it, I think I'll take a little extra for the trouble. Because you know what happens when a place like this gets too comfortable with certain kinds of people. Customers stop coming. Jamal's pulse spiked. She had known it was coming, but hearing it out loud, hearing the contempt, the venom dripping from every word ignited something deep, raw, and burning. She set her clippers down, slow and deliberate. If you're that worried about your customers, Pearl, she said, voice even, controlled, then you don't need to worry about me tacking up space here anymore. Pearl's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. Jamal took off her apron, folding it neatly, setting it on the counter. I quit. A hush fell over the shop. Pearl stared at her like she had lost her mind. Oh, don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. You think you'll find another job that pays this well? You think people are going to line up to have their hair cut by? She stopped herself, but Jamal heard the words anyway. By you. By a black woman who should know better than to step out of line. Ray stood then, slow and steady, meeting Pearl's gaze with the quiet force of a man who had faced much worse than her. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he said simply. And then, with a final glance at Jamal, he turned and walked out. Jamal followed without looking back. The heat outside felt different when Jamal stepped into it, like the air itself had shifted around her, thick with something heavier than just the southern summer. She had quit. The words still rang in her head, not with regret but with an almost surreal finality. Years of swallowing her pride, of enduring Pearl's barely veiled contempt, of knowing she was the best stylist in that damn shop but never being treated like it, all of it had ended in a single moment. Ray was already a few steps ahead, his pace steady but unhurried, like a man who had seen enough to know that nothing surprised him anymore. He didn't turn around until they were halfway down the block. You all right? His voice was calm, unreadable. Jamal let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders like she was shaking off the weight of the last few years. Ask me again in an hour. Ray gave a small nod like he understood more than he was letting on. He took off his cap, ran a hand over his freshly cut hair, and glanced down the street. Come on. You need a drink. Jamal let out a dry chuckle. You buying? Damn right. They ended up at Murphy's, a small bar at the edge of town, the kind of place where people came to disappear for a few hours. The bartender, a man named Vic who had been pouring drinks longer than Jamal had been alive, raised an eyebrow when he saw Ray but didn't ask questions. Jamal took the first sip of her beer in silence, letting the cool bitterness settle on her tongue. The adrenaline was still running hot in her veins, but beneath it was something else, a kind of clarity she hadn't expected. I should be panicking, she admitted, setting her bottle down. I just quit my job with nothing lined up. No backup plan, no safety net. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Pearl's been holding that damn contract over me for years, making sure I never had enough to start fresh. Now I've got nothing. Ray took a slow sip of his whiskey, watching her over the rim of his glass. You've got more than you think. Jamal let out a small, humorless laugh. Yeah? Like what? Ray leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the bar. "You got your reputation. You got a whole town that knows you're the best stylist in that shop, hell, the best in the county. You got people who'd rather sit in your chair than anywhere else. And now," he shrugged, "now you got a story." Jamal frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ray set his glass down, his expression thoughtful. "I write for a reason, Jamal. People don't care about what happens behind closed doors, not until someone forces them to look. Pearl, she's been running that place like a plantation, thinking nobody would ever call her out on it. But today, you did. And people saw it. They heard it." Jamal's fingers tightened around the neck of her bottle. "That's not going to pay my bills." Ray's lips curled slightly. "No, but it's going to do something better." She studied him, searching for the catch. "And what's that?" "I'm going to write about it," he said simply. "Not just what happened today, but everything. The way she treated you, the way she's been treating you for years. And I'm not the only one talking." Jamal exhaled, suddenly aware of just how many clients had been in that shop when it all went down. Women who came in weekly, women who loved to talk. Word was already spreading. Ray tapped the counter, signaling for another drink. "By tomorrow morning, the whole town's going to know exactly what went down. And Pearl?" He smirked, shaking his head. "She's going to wish she never opened her damn mouth." Jamal felt the weight in her chest shift, not disappear, but move into something different. A slow, simmering realization that Pearl's grip on her was finally gone. She didn't have a job, didn't have a plan, but for the first time in years she wasn't afraid. And that felt like power. By morning, the town had turned against Pearl. Jamal woke up to a buzzing phone, messages piling in from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Clients, friends, even former co-workers, all of them had heard. It had only taken one night, one article. Ray's piece ran in the local paper first thing in the morning, detailing everything: the years of quiet discrimination, the pay disparities, the way Pearl had always found a way to remind Jamal that she was just a worker, never an equal. But it was the ending that hit hardest. Yesterday, Rivertown watched as a black woman with more skill and heart than anyone in that salon was punished for an act of kindness. We watched as a business that has thrived on exclusion made it clear that the only thing it values more than money is control. And now we decide if we let that stand. Jamal scrolled through the comments, her stomach tight. The town was angry. Pearl's hair studio was trending on local social media pages, not in a good way. Clients were canceling appointments, vowing never to step foot in there again. Some were demanding Pearl step down entirely. The women who had been in the salon that day hadn't stayed silent. They had talked to their families, their friends, spreading the story faster than even Ray's article could. And just like that, Pearl's reputation was crumbling. Jamal was still trying to process it all when her phone rang, a number she never expected. The mayor. She stared at the screen for a long second before finally answering. "This is Jamal." Jamal, Mayor Benjamin Wallace's voice was smooth but firm. "I heard about what happened. Read about it, too." Jamal didn't respond. She wasn't sure what to say. "I'd like to meet with you today," the mayor continued. "I believe Rivertown owes you a conversation." A conversation. That was new. By noon, Jamal found herself in the mayor's office, seated across from Wallace as he folded his hands on the polished desk. The man had been in office for years, a politician through and through, always careful, always measured. But today he seemed genuinely troubled. "I won't dance around the issue," Wallace began. "What happened at Pearl's was unacceptable, and it doesn't reflect the kind of town we claim to be." Jamal arched an eyebrow. "You sure about that? Because it seemed pretty normal to me." Wallace's expression tightened, but he nodded. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you." He leaned back in his chair. "I've had quite a few conversations this morning. Business owners, council members, hell, even my wife had some words for me over breakfast." He exhaled sharply. "People are upset, and rightfully so." Jamal waited. She knew where this was going. "The town wants to do something to make this right," Wallace said carefully. "Some have suggested we put together a fund to help you get back on your feet, maybe even open your own salon." Jamal stilled. She had expected the town to react. Expected Pearl to take a hit, maybe even shut down. But this people offering to hand her money, she hadn't seen this coming. She could see it now, the headlines, the pity-filled nods. Rivertown redeems itself by helping the poor black woman it wronged. Her stomach turned. No! Wallace blinked. I'm sorry. Jamal lifted her chin. I don't want charity. The mayor looked genuinely confused. Jamal, this isn't charity. It's the community trying to do right by you. You want to do right by me? She leaned forward, holding his gaze. Then don't just throw money at the problem so everyone can pat themselves on the back and move on. Fix the real issue. Call Pearl out by name. Acknowledge that what happened wasn't just unacceptable, it was discrimination. Make it clear that Rivertown doesn't stand for that. Wallace hesitated, his jaw tightening. Jamal gave a dry laugh, shaking her head. Yeah, that's what I thought. Before he could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Ray stepped in. Jamal frowned. She hadn't expected him to be here, but the moment he met her eyes, she knew something was up. Wallace let out a small sigh, rubbing his temple. Let me guess you have something to say too. Ray slid his hands into his pockets. Sure do. The mayor gestured for him to continue, looking tired already. Ray stepped closer, glancing at Jamal before speaking. You know she doesn't want a handout, but she does need something. Jamal frowned. Ray. He held up a hand, stopping her. I own a building, he said simply. Been sitting on it for a while. Needs some work, but it's got space. Enough for a shop. He shrugged. Figured it's about time someone used it. Jamal stared. You what? Ray met her gaze, steady. You want to earn it, right? Then let's make a deal. You run your salon out to there. Pay me rent when you get on your feet. No favors. Just business. Silence stretched in the room. Jamal wasn't used to people like Ray. People who saw her, not as a story, not as something to fix, but as someone worth investing in. She swallowed hard. You serious? Ray's lips quirked. I don't say things I don't mean. Wallace exhaled, running a hand down his face. Well, that certainly changes things. Jamal let out a slow breath, then turned back to the mayor. So here's what's going to happen, she said, voice steady. You're going to make a statement. You're going to say Pearl's name, and you're going to make damn sure every business owner in this town knows that what she did won't fly here. She sat back. And I'll take care of the rest myself. Wallace studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right, Jamal, he said. You've got yourself a deal. Jamal stood outside the mayor's office, the weight of the conversation still settling in her chest. The sun hung high, beating down on the pavement, but she barely noticed. This was real. The deal had been made. Her deal. Not charity, not a handout, an opportunity, on her terms. And for the first time since walking out of Pearl's salon, she let herself believe it. Ray leaned against the railing beside her, watching the street like a man who had seen 100 different versions of this town. You all right? Jamal let out a slow breath, running a hand through her curls. I think I might be. He nodded, taking a beat before saying, You're going to need help. She smirked. Is that your way of offering? Ray shrugged. Got a few connections. People who owe me favors. I'll see what I can do. He paused, then added, This place of yours, it's got to be more than just a salon. Jamal frowned, glancing over. What do you mean? Ray exhaled, his gaze steady. You're not just opening a business, Jamal. You're setting a standard. You saw what happened back there. This town's been turning a blind eye for years. Now they're watching. So you got to show them what's possible. Jamal held his stare, something unspoken passing between them. He was right. This wasn't just about cutting hair. It was about proving something. By the end of the week, the building was hers. It wasn't much yet, just 4 walls, a cracked mirror, and an old neon sign from whatever business had been there before. But standing in the empty space, Jamal could already see it. She could see the chairs lined up, the hum of clippers, the quiet confidence of clients walking out looking and feeling like their best selves. The work was slow. She refused to take donations, no matter how many people tried to hand her cash with guilty smiles. Instead, she made every dollar count. She saved, she bartered, she pulled favors from suppliers who had known her for years. Ray held up his end of the deal, introducing her to people who could get things done: painters, electricians, even an old friend who had a knack for refurbishing furniture. The community showed up in ways she hadn't expected. People dropped by, offering what they could: a spare chair, a fresh coat of paint, even just a kind word. Not because they pitied her, but because they believed in her. And then, one morning, it was ready. The Brooks Company hair studio opened with no grand ceremony, no speeches, just an open door and the promise of something different. The first client walked in before the open sign had even settled in the window. Then the next, and the next. By noon, every chair was full. And Pearl. Her salon never recovered. Her regulars vanished. The staff started quitting, one by one, until she was left running a business that no longer had the reputation to keep it alive. Within a year, she shut it down. No public statement, no announcement, just a quiet, unnoticed ending to something that had once ruled over Rivertown's beauty industry. Jamal never went back. One afternoon, months after her shop had found its rhythm, Ray came by. He leaned in the doorway, watching as Jamal shaped the edges of a young boy's fade, her hands steady, sure. When she finished, dusting off the cape, Ray gave her a small nod. "Told you," he said. Jamal smirked. "Told me what?" "That you had more than you thought." She looked around the shop, at the clients, at the sign in the window, at the life she had built with her own damn hands. And she knew he was right. The world ain't fair. But sometimes, if you stand your ground, you can make it a little bit better. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.